In the Los Angeles County Superior Court, where the morning sun cast long shadows through towering windows, Harrison Ford sat quietly in the witness box. The actor, known for his roles as both daring pilots and thoughtful heroes, was there to testify in a case involving aviation safety regulations, a subject he knew intimately as both an accomplished pilot and a longtime advocate for flight safety. Judge Eleanor Martinez presided over the courtroom with a reputation for strict adherence to procedure and little patience for celebrity status. Her stern demeanor had earned her the nickname, the Iron Gavel, among local attorneys, and today she seemed particularly focused on maintaining what she considered proper courtroom decorum. The case itself centered around proposed changes to small aircraft safety regulations, a matter Ford had been passionate about for decades. His presence wasn't just as a celebrity witness. He had spent years working with aviation safety organizations, logging thousands of flight hours, and even participating in real-life rescue operations with his own aircraft. What caught the judge's attention wasn't Ford's testimony, but the small silver cross he wore, a gift from a young pilot he had once rescued in his helicopter during a mountain search and rescue operation. The cross had become a personal reminder of the responsibility pilots held for others' safety, but Judge Martinez saw it differently. The morning had started routinely enough. Ford, dressed in a navy suit that spoke of quiet authority rather than Hollywood flash, had taken the stand prepared to share his extensive knowledge of aviation safety. His demeanor carried the same focused intensity he brought to his flying, measured, precise, and thoroughly prepared. But before he could begin his testimony, Judge Martinez interrupted. "Mr. Ford, in this courtroom, we maintain strict neutrality. That religious symbol will need to be removed before you can testify." Her tone suggested she expected immediate compliance, the same she received from most who entered her courtroom. What the judge didn't know was that Ford's understanding of constitutional law matched his expertise in aviation. Years of advocacy work had taught him that defending rights required the same attention to detail as piloting an aircraft. Every regulation, every precedent, every constitutional principle had to be understood and respected. The gallery stirred slightly at this unexpected confrontation. The attorneys present exchanged glances, recognizing that this routine safety hearing had suddenly veered into constitutional territory. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her keyboard, sensing the significance of what was about to unfold. Ford's response was characteristically measured, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that had commanded both movie sets and cockpits. "Your Honor, respectfully, I believe we need to discuss the constitutional implications of that request." His tone wasn't confrontational, it carried the same careful precision he used when reviewing flight plans. The judge's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She was used to instant compliance, not thoughtful challenge. "Mr. Ford, this isn't about constitutional law. This is about maintaining appropriate courtroom decorum." Her words carried a warning, but they also revealed an assumption about the actor's legal knowledge. What happened next would demonstrate why it's dangerous to mistake a performer's profession for the limits of their expertise. Ford reached into his jacket and withdrew a small, well-worn copy of the Constitution. This wasn't for show, it was the same copy he'd studied during his years of advocacy work, its margins filled with notes and references. The morning light continued to stream through the high windows, now seeming to highlight the subtle tension building in the room. The attorneys involved in the aviation case sat forward, recognizing that their safety regulation hearing had unexpectedly become a forum for constitutional debate. Judge Martinez tried to reassert control. "Mr. Ford, while your acting credentials are impressive, this court's rules are not up for debate." Her tone suggested she still saw him as merely a celebrity witness, not recognizing the depth of knowledge he was about to demonstrate. Ford's response would set the tone for everything that followed. "Your Honor, my understanding of the Constitution comes not from acting, but from years of public advocacy and civil rights work. Would you allow me to cite some relevant Supreme Court precedents regarding religious expression in government spaces?" The courtroom fell silent. This wasn't the response they expected from a Hollywood star. The judge's earlier confidence wavered slightly as she realized this wouldn't be a simple matter of asserting authority over a celebrity witness. As Ford prepared to present his constitutional argument, The gallery watched with growing interest. His demeanor remained as steady as if he were running through pre-flight checks, methodical, thorough, and focused on essential details that could make all the difference. The morning sun had climbed higher now, its light creating a natural spotlight on the witness stand. In that illumination, Harrison Ford prepared to demonstrate that his expertise extended far beyond the cockpit or the movie set, into the fundamental principles that protected everyone's rights. What would happen next would not only challenge assumptions about celebrity knowledge but would provide a masterclass in constitutional advocacy from an unexpected source. The actor who had played so many roles defending justice was about to do it in real life, armed not with special effects but with detailed knowledge of constitutional law. As Harrison Ford opened his well-worn copy of the Constitution, the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. His approach to constitutional law carried the same methodical precision he brought to aviation, each point carefully considered, each argument thoroughly prepared. Judge Martinez, still believing she could maintain control of the situation, was about to discover why preparation matters as much in legal matters as it does in flight safety. "Your Honor," Ford began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded both cockpits and movie sets. "I'd like to start with Employment Division versus Smith, 1990, which established that while neutral, generally applicable laws may burden religious practice, any law specifically targeting religious expression must meet strict scrutiny." He paused, letting the legal principle sink in. "Would you say this courtroom has a generally applicable policy against all jewelry, or is it specifically targeting religious symbols?" The judge shifted slightly, her earlier certainty showing the first signs of strain. "Mr. Ford, this court's concern is with maintaining appropriate decorum," but before she could finish, Ford continued with the same steady precision he used when reviewing flight instruments. "That's an important point, Your Honor. In fact, I'd like to direct your attention to Capitol Square Review Board versus Panett, 1995, where the Supreme Court specifically addressed the display of religious symbols in government buildings." Ford turned a page in his Constitution, where careful annotations lined the margins. The court held that religious expression cannot be singled out for discrimination, even in government forums. The attorneys present exchanged impressed glances. This wasn't just someone who had memorized a few cases, this was a thorough understanding of constitutional principles, presented with the same attention to detail that had made Ford both a successful actor and a respected pilot. "Furthermore," he continued, "I've noticed several other witnesses today wearing non-religious jewelry without comment. This raises equal protection concerns under the 14th Amendment." His observation was delivered not as an accusation, but as a factual point, much like noting weather conditions before a flight. Judge Martinez attempted to reassert control. "Mr. Ford, while your knowledge is unexpected, this court has discretion in maintaining appropriate standards." Her tone suggested she was trying to find solid ground in increasingly uncertain territory. Ford nodded respectfully before responding. "Indeed, Your Honor. However, that discretion must be exercised within constitutional boundaries. Just as aviation regulations must balance safety with practicality, judicial discretion must balance courtroom management with fundamental rights." The gallery watched as Ford pulled out another document, a compilation of Supreme Court decisions specifically relating to religious expression in government settings. His preparation was as thorough as any pre-flight checklist, each point documented and cross-referenced. "In Good News Club versus Milford Central School," he continued, "the Supreme Court emphasized that viewpoint discrimination against religious expression violates the First Amendment. The parallel here is clear. Requiring the removal of religious symbols while allowing non-religious jewelry creates exactly the kind of viewpoint discrimination the court warned against." The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing every word of what was becoming a remarkable constitutional law lecture from an unexpected source. Law clerks in attendance had begun taking notes, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Ford's next point demonstrated why his advocacy work had earned respect in both aviation and legal circles. "Your Honor, just as aviation safety requires consistent application of standards, constitutional protection requires consistent application of rights." We can't have one rule for religious expression and another for secular display. Judge Martinez, now visibly reassessing her position, interjected. Mr. Ford, are you suggesting that any religious symbol should be permitted in court? Her question revealed a genuine engagement with the constitutional issues being raised. Ford's response showcased his understanding of balanced advocacy. Not at all, Your Honor. Just as we have reasonable restrictions on aircraft operations, we can have reasonable restrictions on courtroom conduct. But those restrictions must be neutral, generally applicable, and not targeted at religious expression specifically. The morning sun continued to stream through the high windows, now illuminating Ford as he referenced another Supreme Court decision. In Church of the Lukumi Babalu I versus City of Hialeah, the court established that government actions targeting religious practices must meet strict scrutiny, the highest standard of constitutional review. His presentation style reflected years of experience in both aviation and advocacy, clear, precise, and focused on essential points. Each legal argument was delivered with the same careful attention he would give to crucial flight instruments. Consider this, Your Honor, Ford continued, his voice remaining measured and respectful. When I'm piloting an aircraft, every decision must be based on clear, consistent principles. The same should apply to restrictions on religious expression. They can't be arbitrary or selectively enforced. The gallery had grown completely silent, absorbed in this unexpected masterclass in constitutional law. The attorneys present recognized that they were witnessing something rare, celebrity status being used not for privilege, but for principled advocacy. Ford then did something that demonstrated his strategic understanding of advocacy. He offered the judge a way to resolve the situation that would preserve both constitutional principles and judicial authority. Your Honor, perhaps we could establish clear, neutral guidelines for all personal expression in court, regardless of its nature. This would maintain decorum while protecting constitutional rights. The judge's expression showed she was considering his suggestion seriously. Ford had managed to transform what could have been a confrontation into a constructive discussion about constitutional principles and practical application. In my years of aviation advocacy, Ford added, I've learned that the best solutions come from understanding both the rules and their purpose. The First Amendment's protection of religious expression serves a purpose as vital as any aviation safety regulation. It protects fundamental freedoms while allowing for reasonable restrictions. The legal professionals in the room couldn't help but be impressed by how Ford had connected his aviation experience to constitutional principles. His argument was as well structured as a flight plan, with clear objectives and careful attention to important details. As he prepared to conclude his constitutional argument, Ford drew one final parallel between his areas of expertise. Your Honor, in aviation we have a saying, better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air, than in the air wishing you were on the ground. In constitutional law, it's better to err on the side of protecting rights than to risk infringing them. The morning light now filled the courtroom completely, seeming to underscore the clarity Ford had brought to the constitutional issues at hand. His silver cross caught the light occasionally, a reminder of both the immediate issue and the broader principles at stake. Judge Martinez found herself in an unexpected position. She had begun the morning confident in her authority to regulate courtroom appearance, but now faced a carefully constructed constitutional argument from someone she had underestimated. The tension in the room had transformed from confrontation to anticipation. The gallery waited to see how the judge would respond to this thorough and respectful challenge to her authority. Ford stood ready with more constitutional precedents if needed, but his expression suggested he hoped for a reasonable resolution. The moment perfectly captured why it's dangerous to make assumptions about anyone's knowledge or capabilities. The actor known for playing heroes had demonstrated real-life heroism of a different kind, standing up for constitutional principles with knowledge, preparation, and respect. Judge Martinez's response would become a study in judicial wisdom and the capacity for growth. The distinguished jurist, who had begun the morning certain of her authority to regulate religious expression in her courtroom, now found herself navigating the intersection of constitutional rights and judicial discretion with unexpected guidance from a Hollywood star-turned legal scholar. Mr. Ford, she began, her tone noticeably different from her earlier commanding manner, "your analysis of the constitutional implications is comprehensive." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "You've raised significant points about the selective enforcement of dress codes and the constitutional protections for religious expression." The gallery watched as the judge, known for her unwavering positions, began a thoughtful reconsideration of her earlier directive. The attorneys present recognized the significance of this moment. It wasn't just about a cross necklace anymore. It was about the broader principles of religious freedom and equal protection under the law. Ford maintained his characteristic composure, the same steady presence he brought to both flying and advocacy work. The silver cross caught the morning light as he stood ready to continue his defense if necessary, but his expression suggested he hoped for a resolution that would strengthen constitutional protections for everyone. Furthermore, the judge continued, "your connection between aviation safety protocols and constitutional principles is particularly illuminating. Just as consistent application of safety standards is crucial in aviation, consistent application of constitutional protections is essential in our legal system." The court reporter's fingers flew across her keyboard, capturing what was becoming a remarkable example of judicial self-correction. Law clerks in the gallery continued taking notes, recognizing that this exchange would likely appear in legal journals and constitutional law textbooks. Ford seized this moment not for personal victory but to advance broader understanding. "Your Honor, in aviation, we learn that safety comes from understanding both the rules and their purpose. The same applies to constitutional rights. They work best when we comprehend not just their letter but their spirit." The atmosphere in the courtroom had transformed completely. What had begun as a confrontation over authority had evolved into a sophisticated discussion about the balance between judicial discretion and constitutional rights. The other participants in the aviation safety hearing, momentarily forgotten, watched in amazement as their routine proceeding had become a landmark constitutional moment. Judge Martinez then did something that demonstrated true judicial wisdom. "Mr. Ford, would you be willing to work with the court to develop guidelines for religious expression that protect both constitutional rights and courtroom decorum? Your experience in balancing aviation safety with practical considerations could be valuable in this context." This unexpected invitation caused a stir among the legal professionals present. It was rare for a judge to actively seek input from a witness, but Ford's unique combination of practical experience and constitutional knowledge offered an opportunity for meaningful reform. "I would be honored, Your Honor," Ford replied, his response reflecting the same commitment he brought to aviation safety advocacy. "Perhaps we could create a framework that provides clear guidance while respecting individual rights, similar to how aviation regulations balance safety requirements with operational flexibility." The judge nodded, then addressed the entire courtroom. "Let the record reflect that this court's earlier directive regarding Mr. Ford's religious expression is withdrawn. Furthermore, we will be reviewing our policies to ensure consistent and constitutionally sound application." What happened next would be quoted in legal education seminars for years to come. Ford offered a perspective that connected his various areas of expertise. "In flying, we say that good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. Perhaps in law, good constitutional practice comes from challenging questionable restrictions, and wisdom comes from being willing to reconsider them." The impact of the exchange rippled through the courthouse immediately. Law clerks could be seen texting colleagues, knowing this would be discussed in legal circles by lunchtime. Court officers who had initially tensed for confrontation now stood relaxed, some nodding in appreciation of the peaceful and constructive resolution. Judge Martinez's next words would be cited frequently in discussions of judicial ethics. "This court appreciates not just Mr. Ford's knowledge of constitutional law, but the respectful and constructive manner in which he presented his argument. It demonstrates that advocacy can be both forceful and dignified." The attorneys involved in the original aviation safety case exchanged glances, recognizing that their routine hearing had become a footnote to a more significant legal event. Their clients, watching from the gallery, seemed equally impressed by the unexpected constitutional law seminar they had witnessed. Ford's response captured why this moment would resonate beyond the immediate issue. "Thank you, Your Honor." Just as aviation safety depends on open dialogue and continuous improvement, our legal system grows stronger when we can discuss constitutional rights openly and work together to protect them. The morning sun had risen higher now, its light no longer creating harsh shadows but instead illuminating the courtroom evenly, as if nature itself was acknowledging the clarity that had been brought to constitutional principles. The simple silver cross around Ford's neck caught the light occasionally, now a symbol not just of personal faith but of protected constitutional rights. As the court prepared to return to the aviation safety matter, the impact of what had transpired continued to resonate through the room. This wasn't just about a celebrity standing up to judicial overreach, it was about how knowledge, preparation, and respectful advocacy could advance constitutional principles while maintaining the dignity of all involved. Law students observing the proceedings would later remark that they had learned more about practical constitutional advocacy in those few hours than in weeks of classroom instruction. Ford's ability to connect aviation safety principles with constitutional rights had provided a unique perspective on how different fields of expertise could inform legal understanding. The judge's willingness to reconsider her position and engage in constructive dialogue demonstrated why the legal system works best when all participants remain open to growth and learning. Her example would be cited in judicial training sessions as a model of how to handle constitutional challenges gracefully. What made this moment particularly powerful was how Ford had used his celebrity not for special treatment, but to advance constitutional principles that would benefit everyone. His advocacy had demonstrated that expertise in one field, whether aviation or entertainment, could provide valuable insights into constitutional rights. As the proceedings prepared to resume their original focus on aviation safety, the courtroom had been transformed. The participants had witnessed not just a defense of religious expression, but a masterclass in how different forms of expertise could contribute to constitutional understanding. The legacy of this morning's exchange would extend far beyond the immediate issue of religious expression in courtrooms. It would serve as a reminder that constitutional rights are best protected when knowledge, respect, and practical experience come together in thoughtful advocacy. In the months and years following Harrison Ford's remarkable constitutional defense, the impact of his courtroom exchange with Judge Martinez continued to reshape both legal education and the understanding of how different forms of expertise could inform constitutional rights. What had begun as a dispute over a cross necklace had evolved into a broader movement for interdisciplinary approaches to legal advocacy. Law schools across the country began incorporating the transcript into their constitutional law curriculum, not just for its legal principles, but for its demonstration of how knowledge from other fields could enhance legal understanding. Ford's ability to connect aviation safety protocols with constitutional protections offered a new paradigm for legal education. Judge Martinez's courtroom underwent its own transformation. The judge, influenced by the exchange, began encouraging attorneys to draw insights from their diverse backgrounds and experiences when presenting legal arguments. Her courtroom became known as a place where innovative legal thinking was welcomed, as long as it was grounded in solid constitutional principles. The legal community's response was particularly significant. Bar associations developed new continuing education programs that brought together experts from various fields to discuss how their professional experiences could inform legal advocacy. The Ford paradigm became shorthand for interdisciplinary approaches to constitutional law. 6 months after the incident, Ford was invited to speak at several prominent law schools. His lectures weren't just about his courtroom experience. They expanded into discussions about how various forms of professional expertise could contribute to constitutional understanding. His unique perspective as both a pilot and advocate brought new depth to legal education. Aviation law programs were particularly influenced by the case. Ford's demonstration of how safety protocols could parallel constitutional protections led to new approaches in teaching regulatory law. Law schools began incorporating aviation safety principles into their discussions of how to balance rights with practical considerations. 1 year later, Judge Martinez and Ford appeared together at a constitutional law symposium. Their joint presentation became a powerful demonstration of how productive dialogue between the bench and advocates could lead to better understanding of constitutional principles. The judge openly discussed how the incident had changed her approach to courtroom management, while Ford shared insights about the intersection of professional expertise and legal advocacy. Law firms began incorporating the case into their training programs, not just for its legal principles but for its lessons about drawing on diverse expertise in advocacy. The way Ford had connected aviation safety with constitutional rights became a model for how attorneys could leverage their clients' professional knowledge in legal arguments. The courthouse where the incident occurred saw its own changes. A subtle but significant shift occurred in how judges approached expertise from various fields. Legal arguments that drew thoughtful parallels between professional experience and constitutional principles were given serious consideration, leading to more nuanced judicial decision-making. The media's coverage of the incident evolved from initial sensationalism about a celebrity judge confrontation to more substantive analysis of how different forms of expertise could inform legal understanding. Journalists began exploring how professional knowledge from various fields could contribute to constitutional advocacy. 2 years after the incident, a legal journal published a comprehensive analysis of its impact. They found that courts had become more receptive to arguments that drew thoughtful parallels between professional standards in various fields and constitutional principles. The Ford effect was credited with opening new avenues for constitutional advocacy. Professional organizations across various fields began developing programs to help their members understand how their expertise could contribute to legal advocacy. Engineers, doctors, pilots, and other professionals were taught to recognize how their professional standards could inform constitutional arguments. The incident's influence extended to judicial training. New judges were encouraged to consider how expertise from various fields could inform constitutional interpretation. The case became a standard example of how judges could benefit from being open to insights from different professional perspectives. 3 years later, when Ford published a book about the intersection of professional expertise and constitutional rights, it became required reading in both law schools and aviation programs. His ability to bridge these different fields offered a new model for interdisciplinary legal thinking. Legal technology companies developed new research tools that helped attorneys identify parallels between professional standards in various fields and constitutional principles. These tools often cited the Ford case as an example of how such connections could strengthen legal arguments. The actor's own career took an interesting turn. While continuing his entertainment work, Ford began dedicating more time to legal education and advocacy. He developed programs teaching professionals how their expertise could contribute to constitutional understanding, emphasizing the importance of bringing diverse perspectives to legal advocacy. 4 years after the incident, Judge Martinez's courtroom procedures were being studied and replicated across the country. Her approach to integrating insights from various professional fields while maintaining legal rigor became a model for other courts. The guidelines she and Ford had developed for religious expression were adopted by numerous jurisdictions. The case's impact on legal education continued to grow. Law professors noted how the incident demonstrated the value of interdisciplinary approaches to constitutional law. Students were encouraged to consider how their previous professional experiences could inform their legal understanding. Aviation safety organizations began incorporating legal principles into their training programs, recognizing how constitutional rights and safety protocols could inform each other. Ford's demonstration of these parallels had created new bridges between these seemingly distinct fields. The courthouse where the incident occurred became something of a landmark in legal circles. Lawyers and law students would visit to see where this remarkable exchange had taken place, some even sitting in the same gallery seats where observers had witnessed the transformation of a routine religious expression case into a milestone in interdisciplinary legal thinking. What made the case particularly valuable for legal education was how it combined multiple elements of effective advocacy, thorough preparation, respectful presentation, strategic thinking, and the ability to draw meaningful parallels between different fields of expertise. These elements became known as the Ford Framework for Advanced Legal Advocacy. The long-term impact on religious freedom cases was particularly noteworthy. Courts across the country became more receptive to arguments that drew parallels between professional standards and constitutional protections, often citing the Ford case when analyzing how different forms of expertise could inform constitutional interpretation. civil rights organizations began incorporating lessons from the case into their advocacy training. They emphasized how advocates could draw on their professional expertise to strengthen constitutional arguments, following Ford's example of connecting practical experience with legal principles. The case also influenced how celebrities approached advocacy. Rather than relying solely on their fame, more public figures began leveraging their professional expertise to contribute meaningfully to legal and policy discussions. Ford had demonstrated that celebrity could be a platform for substantive advocacy. Law enforcement agencies developed new training modules that incorporated insights from various professional fields into their understanding of constitutional rights. Officers were taught to recognize how different forms of expertise could inform their approach to protecting both public safety and individual rights. The impact on judicial training was equally significant. New judges received specific instruction about how to evaluate and incorporate insights from various professional fields while maintaining proper legal analysis. The Ford case served as a primary example of how such interdisciplinary approaches could enhance judicial decision-making. As new challenges to constitutional rights emerged, the principles established in the Ford case continued to provide guidance. Courts and advocates regularly referenced how knowledge from various professional fields could inform constitutional interpretation and protection. The legacy of that morning in Judge Martinez's courtroom went beyond legal precedent. It demonstrated how expertise from various fields could contribute to constitutional understanding, showing that effective advocacy often draws on diverse forms of professional knowledge and experience. 5 years after the incident, when legal scholars analyzed its lasting impact, they noted how it had fundamentally changed the way courts approached expertise from different fields. The case had shown that constitutional advocacy could be enriched by thoughtful parallels between professional standards and legal principles. The story had become more than just a remarkable legal exchange. It had evolved into a testament to the power of bringing diverse forms of expertise to constitutional advocacy. It reminded everyone that in a complex world, protecting constitutional rights often requires drawing on knowledge and experience from many different fields.